Sure, I could sit here and tell you that Code Veronica is the most underrated Resident Evil game, but I feel like over the years that's kind of changed a little bit. I feel like some people are starting to see Code Veronica as the classic that it is. There's still some work to be done where Code Veronica is concerned, but I feel like it's kind of got a cult following to the point where we don't really need to class it as underrated anymore. Sure, it's still got its haters, but people talk about it, more or less. The two games that I see very little people talking about, very little people even mention when they're listing these games, because they've got spin-off titles, is Revelations 1 and Revelations 2. Now, I'm specifically going to be talking about Revelations 2 because I feel like that's the one that's more underrated out the two. But honestly, you could use both games here. I feel like a lot of people skipped out on the Revelations games and just didn't play them because when they see Resident Evil, they expect to see a number after the title. They don't want to see a silly subtitle. And I get it, Revelations as a subtitle isn't the most unique. It's a bit uninspired, if you will. But the games are top notch. Now, the first Revelations is a little bit weird because it was a 3DS game that got ported to console. So the console version has a few, I don't know how to put this, like quirks about it where animations are concerned. Like the aiming seems a little bit off, but overall it's still a superb game. Revelations 2, however, is a console game first and foremost. Sure, it's been put on portable since. There's even a PlayStation Vita version of this game. Can't say I've ever played that version. I even own a Vita, so I don't know why I never played it, but I can't imagine it's the right way to play this game. When it was released, it was done episodically. That means I can't remember if it was weekly or monthly, but you never got every episode up front. It was like you got episode 1, then you got episode 2, and there was 5 in total with some bonus episodes. But the good thing about this was, although it got a lot of flack back in the day being like, why don't you just release it all in one go? And sure, you don't have to deal with this now. Every episode is available to you. Originally, you only had the 2 sections because you have to play 2 sections with 2 separate parties of characters. So you start the game as Claire and Moira, then you move on to Barry and Natalia. After you've done these 2 sections, and the sections aren't the longest, the replayability was there because it kind of let you do New Game Plus where you were just kind of grinding out battle points and getting new skills and whatnot. But included with each episode was levels of raid mode. And if you haven't played raid mode when it comes to Resident Evil, raid mode is superb, arguably better than Mercenaries. It lets you level your characters up, it lets you use a ton of characters, it's co-op, you've got to go through hundreds of levels, you're getting new equipment. It's honestly, it deserves its own video for itself, raid mode. It's such a good mode. But Revelations 2, when everything was said and done, had great characters, great story. Sure, it's a little cheesy, but I feel like that's what Revelations goes for. It's trying to be a little bit cheesy. It's not trying to be too serious. It's exactly what you expect from Resident Evil, if I'm being honest. You've got your cheesy one-liners, your really cheesy B-movie storyline, with twists and turns that are pretty cool that you don't really see coming. Sure, it's not perfect. I'd argue it's kind of annoying, the gimmick of like switching character and then like shining a flashlight to highlight an item so the other character can kind of pick it up. I feel like that's way too gimmicky. I feel like the first game did that a little bit better, where it was just kind of like you brought up this little viewing thing and you could find things through that. It wasn't like switching character. But however, when you stun characters, like you stun the enemy with like Moira, for example, with the flashlight, I know that makes no sense, but it's a pretty cool mechanic nonetheless. You stun the enemy with a flashlight, blind them, then Claire can run up, roundhouse kick it, then you can switch back to Moira and then you can stab it on the ground with a crowbar. Or I mean, as long as you unlock the skill, Claire can finish it off at itself. So it's pretty cool mechanically. Enemy designs are cool across the board, sort of. Some of them are very much rip-offs of other things, and I'm a little bit biased towards this game. I know some people say this game is kind of mediocre in some sense, but I see it as like the Resident Evil and Evil Within love child that it is. It's clearly a response to Evil Within back in the day. They kind of went, we need to do this, we need to be dark and gritty with our enemies, and push it forward. Honestly, most of the enemies just look like they've been ripped out of something like Evil Within, where it's like that very rusty looking, like grimy, very 2000s horror look, which I kind of love, so I'm not complaining about that in any way, shape or form. Weaponry choices are great. You've got your usuals, your pistols, shotguns, machine guns, submachine guns, you name it. Boss fights are decent. Something I will complain about, however, is the sluggish movement when you're moving, especially when you're reloading and you're trying to get out the way of an enemy that's like bashing your head in. It just gets a little bit annoying. I don't know why they made the movement so sluggish when you're just trying to move backwards. But you can deal with it. There's ways to upgrade skills and get around this and kind of avoid it. But just at the beginning of the game, it's very, very annoying. But yeah, Revelations 2 is a blast from start to finish. It's not the longest Resident Evil, but makes up for it with raid mode. It's got a great storyline. This is what I expect from Resident Evil, where it's a little bit cheesy, but it's kind of cool. It's got some good events. The thing with like the Wesker twins and whatnot, that's cool as hell. And the enemies just look cool, at least for the most part they do. Not every one of them's a hit, but that end boss looks honestly really good, and the timeline between like the Claire storyline and the Barry storyline, I know it plays out like a TV show, so every time you were finishing an episode you were like back in the day being like, holy shit, I wonder what happens next. It really was a good experience, and I wouldn't mind another episodic Resident Evil. You can tell it's low budget. This isn't like high tier Resident Evil budget, but it does have Claire, and honestly it's one of the best versions of Claire. This is the kind of Claire Redfield I expect going forward. I do like her in Code Veronica, but sometimes she does grate on me a little bit with the way she talks to Steve and talks to him like he's a child. It's just, I know Steve deserves to be talked to like a child, but there's just something about the way she talks to her. However, in this one, she's very experienced. She even makes lines about guns being more reliable than any person, which is a callback to Code Veronica, Steve, and that's kind of cool. And not to mention, it's the first time we get to be Barry for real. And this version of Barry is awesome. He comes with his own one-liners, and the voice acting's great across the board for the most part. So, sure, some of them are a little bit generic, and it gets a bit annoying, and some of the animations are obviously reused from like Resident Evil 6 and whatnot. And it doesn't have the control of Resident Evil 6, but I don't think it was ever going for that. This was at an era where Resident Evil 6 was seriously frowned upon, so we didn't really need heavy action in Resident Evil. But what we got here is a return to form for Resident Evil, and it was a really great game that I feel like's been forgotten for whatever reason. But yeah, Revelations 2, easily, in my opinion, the most underrated Resident Evil game. Alright people, let me know down below what you think of Revelations 2. You played it before? Did this video make you want to play it? If you're new here, subscribe. But yeah people, that's all I got. I'll catch you later.